Good afternoon. We want to thank everyone here for joining. My name is Emma Marty, Director of Platform and Marketing at Glasswing Ventures. For those who know Glasswing and for those who don't, a brief background. Glasswing is an early stage venture capital firm dedicated to investing in enterprise, platform, and security startups that harness the power of AI and frontier technologies to transform markets and revolutionize industries. We are excited to bring our portfolio together and present this excellent panel today for our CEO Security Roundtable, How to Reduce Risk and Protect Your Brand. The discussion today is in recognition of National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. This year's theme is, If You Connect It, Protect It, encouraging individuals and organizations to own their role in protecting their part of cyberspace, stressing personal accountability and the importance of taking proactive steps to enhance cybersecurity. As a quick note, we encourage audience engagement and participation in this webinar. We will be taking audience questions throughout the session. Please use the Q&A portal on the bar at the bottom of the screen to submit questions. Along with your submission, please indicate if you would like to join the panel and ask questions yourself on screen. If so, you will receive a notification briefly transitioning you from the audience to the panel. Please note, this session is being recorded. And with that, I'll hand the mic over to Rick Grinnell, Glasswing Ventures founder and managing partner.
Thanks, Emma. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning in. As Emma mentioned, my name is Rick Grinnell, and I'm a founding partner and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures. My investment focus is AI-enabled security and enterprise infrastructure, and I'm pleased to be seated at this virtual panel with a group of my portfolio CEOs. Today, we're joined by an excellent audience that includes customers, prospects, partners, investors, Glasswing advisors, employees, and emerging security startups. We look forward to hearing your voices, not just ours. We hope to answer your questions, engage with you over the next hour. With that, we'll get started, and I'll give the floor to our panelists, Josh Shaul from Allure Security, Julie Johnson from Armored Things, Paul Paget of NormShield, Sanjay Patel of SmartHive, and Pat Clawson of Terbium Labs. So I'd like each of you to introduce yourself and then give a short summary of the company you are leading. So Josh, over to you first.
Thanks, Rick. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Josh Shaul. I'm the CEO at Allure Security. I'm a longtime security type person, been in the security industry 23, 24 years. Been focused on web security for almost that entire time. And Allure Security is an interesting young company that's solving one of the oldest problems in web security, which is the problem of phishing, where your brand gets copied, your customers get targeted, they get a bunch of nasty emails telling them that something's wrong and they need to give up some data. And when they do, all heck breaks loose. We've all seen it. We've all run into it. It's been around since, well, we've all been using computers and the internet. And Allure got ourselves started to go and take care of that problem once and for all.
All right, Julie, you're up next.
Thanks, Rick. I'm Julie Johnson-Roberts, co-founder CEO of Armored Things. For those who don't know Armored Things, we are the leading crowd intelligence software helping large venues and campuses reopen safely and maximize their operations and security efficiencies. If you've never heard of crowd intelligence before, you're not the only ones. Our understanding of people and flow has been instrumental before COVID and in today's environment in really rethinking how we invite people into our environments so that we can get back to the new normal.
Paul, you're up next.
Hi, Paul Paget with NormShield. We're in the business of rating companies in cybersecurity, and it sounds pretty simple. Third-party risk is the area of focus because most companies today rely on hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations to deliver their products and services. So we help companies look at that. Look at the ratings across those groups, and probably one of the unique things that we do is provide a financial risk profile on those companies as well. How much financial risk in dollars and cents terms do they provide, present to your organization? This is a big topic for companies today. Phishing attacks, as Josh mentioned, are still the #1 way that organizations get compromised. And phishing the supply chain and the third parties and the consultants that support an organization is really fertile ground for the attackers today. Over 60% of the attacks coming into companies come through those supply chains. So it's a hot topic, it's an important topic, but some of the same old attack vectors are there. They're just using different ways to get in.
Thanks, Paul. Sanjay, over to you.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Hi, my name is Sanjay Patel. I'm the CEO of SmartHive. I actually come from the other side of the table. I've spent the last 25 years on corporate America. I've been involved in some of the largest breaches that corporate America has seen. Post-breach, not implementing the breach, but after the breaches happen, I've helped companies recover from those breaches. And one of the things I realized, there was a constant pain that we asked all our vendors, and a problem we always had is, what are others doing right now? Have we figured everything out? And what are others doing to solve this problem? And that's what we started SmartHive to do. We allow organizations to share threat data with each other in real time, but anonymously. Think of us as ways for cybersecurity, right? You sit in your car, you give directions, you give your destination. All of a sudden, thousands of people are telling you what's in front of you, where's the police, where's the traffic, and all of that is taken into account and make your route safer and faster. We do the same for cybersecurity. We learn from others in real time, see what attacks others are stopping that you have not stopped, and tell you what controls you need to put in place so those attacks don't get to you. So essentially crowdsourcing and using every analyst and every other customer as your analyst, and doing that in less than 90 seconds.
Sanjay, I'm glad you clarified that you were not the cause of the breach.
Well, that's when you're on this side of the thing, you think about that once in a while, but on the other side, you don't.
All right, and finally, Pat, unfortunately, your company has a T as its first letter, so you're last.
Yep, all good. Hey guys, I'm Pat Clawson. I am CEO of Terbium Labs. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. I got in by turning around a NASDAQ company that had been delisted in the gateway firewalling business, and then went to the venture world, and then I went to an AIM listed company and ran an AIM listed security company. Don't do that, by the way, if anybody considering that. Painful experience. Here I'm running Terbium Labs. Terbium Labs is in the digital risk protection space. What does that mean for you? We are an organization that helps businesses identify and mitigate digital risk outside their enterprise. We do that by constantly monitoring the open, the deep, and the dark, including social and mobile. And we do it with 3 very unique capabilities. We have a powerful patent portfolio that allows for the private collection of data and monitoring. So we never know what our client's data is. We stay completely separate. We also provide fully curated results. We do not ask our clients to try to figure out what's a false positive and what is not. We only return actionable results. And the third thing is, we're probably the only vendor that puts all that together with tailored remediation. We offer full takedown services, as well as other forms of risk mitigation in order to help the client solve the problem once we've identified it. There you go.
All right, well, thank you, all of you. Now let's jump into it. So the first question I'd love to kick off the discussion with is really around the year 2020, which I think we'd all love to get past as quickly as possible. But if you think about it, you know, we kicked off early January, things were go-go, things, you know, we're off to the races in terms of sales and our forecasts. And then COVID hit. And on March 13th, as much as I can remember, the world changed dramatically into step function mode, from hot and crazy to a new reality. So, you know, maybe Paul, starting with you, tell me, how have you and the company adapted to the current climate since really mid-March?
Sure. Well, it was, we just put everybody together for the first time in a location in Boston. And so we just started that out in January. So 60 days later, we were out. March 11th, we were done. And we work remote just like everybody else is for the most part. The thing that was the biggest challenge, I think, was the 20-somethings that make up a big chunk of our team. they're used to working together. So that was a challenge, but we figured that out, and we've got a decent rhythm going. I think working remotely on Zoom is harder. I think it's more sequential as opposed to you can do 4 things at once and people in the same room, it seems sometimes. So that we lost that dimension of speed. But in the business that we're in, we found that companies are trying to figure out, how they're going to deal with this problem of third-party risk and the sort of the extended ecosystem. And what really brought attention to that was everybody working from home. So all of a sudden, companies needed VPNs. They needed all these services that they're turning on to support remote workers, and that just opened up the attack surface for the bad guys. So while we were trying to figure out how to manage a company and manage a fairly new team, very new team remotely, at the same time, we were trying to navigate what was happening in our space. And we can talk more about that, but that's sort of upfront what happened between March and April.
Pat, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how things at Terbium Labs have morphed from, say, last January, February, pre-COVID to today, where we're operating differently. The threat vectors have accordingly, changed a bit or changed a lot, which we'll get into in a second. But how has your business changed or adapted since March?
It obviously in a lot of ways, and there are probably too many to count off. I think one of the first is if you're a company that needs to sell your product, you have a sales strategy or sales methodology. And if we're having enterprise class sales, it's often there's part of your sales structure is meant to be out meeting with clients and building those relationships and learning how you can help them solve their problems. In mid-March, that stopped. There was no more enterprise outside reps communicating directly with clients, flying around. So that whole process stopped. You had to figure out how to be more efficient from an inside sales perspective, learn how to communicate with your clients who were in also a similar panic mode. They didn't know what their budgets were going to look like. They were stopping a lot of their evaluation processes. So you had to learn how to live within that environment. And I think the next thing that came out of that was, how do you create a good prospect come customer experience in a way where you're completely disconnected from these people and you may never meet them based on the way we're going right now? How do you deliver a better evaluation experience, proof of concept experience that often had somebody involved in it directly that you will not have directly now? So I think one of the things that we started figuring out after the shock to the body was our sales process was going to change. Our customer engagement process needed to change. And there was a bunch of friction in there that we didn't realize was there that we had to try and get out of the system to make them cleaner and smoother and less expensive to administer. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know.
Absolutely. Josh or Sanjay, want to jump in and add any color on your businesses?
Josh, you want to go first?
It was certainly interesting for Allure. We were just getting ready to launch our product and begin going to market. And my timing, I'm exceptional in the world of timing. My first day at Allure was March 16th. So, just 3 or 4 days after sort of the world changed. So we never experienced the pre-COVID go-to-market dynamic. Everything's been, how do we go to market when the market's closed? And we've been working hard to figure out different routes to market, different ways of approaching folks. But at the same time, the problems that we solve have been growing, both because everybody's sitting at home and clicking on links and jumping into meetings. And so the opportunity for phishing has just really grown significantly, as well as we found that there's an awful lot of information cloning and republishing, disinformation that's out there, published under a trusted brand that we've also been able to sort of jump on and help out with, which is a whole problem space that we'd not considered at all pre-COVID, but it came to us, and so we welcomed it.
Sanjay?
It's been interesting for us, as destructive as COVID has been to the world, right? It has, I'll give an analogy a customer gave me, right? So imagine if you lived in a town or city and you would try to solve your COVID problem from the results you were getting, if you're in charge of the health department, results you're getting from your town or city. you may eventually get to a vaccine. It might take you 2 decades because the amount of people that you're getting data from is pretty small, and you might have a 98% mortality rate, right? Because people aren't going to survive the 2 decades. If you're a larger city, like in New York, you might have a little more access to facility, a little more access to experts. So that might take you, 5, 6, 7 years to get to a vaccine. Now, if you change it to a nation state like America, now you can get to a lot quicker because you have access to more information. But how is America successful? And how do we get to a vaccine quick? Is we learn from small countries like Italy and France, right? France never problem being called small, but we learn in Spain, Italy, and we use an intelligence to get the vaccine, and that will eventually have, hopefully, and make us better. And you take that concept of threat intelligence, right? And real-time threat intelligence. We had the challenge before where people will say, I have 1 of everything and 2 of some other stuff. Why do I need you? Why do you need to learn from others? I've already got it figured out, or my guys will figure it out. Well, this COVID kind of changed that thinking for people that, you may have everything, but somebody else may have figured out something that could help you get there faster or prevent an attack before it gets to them. So I think the mindset of people on collaboration and learning from others has actually changed, and doing it in real, plus, we do it in less than 90 seconds, right? If somebody in France stops an attack, you can learn about an attack and stop it in America in 90 seconds, which makes it really hard for the threat actor. So for us, that mentality shift for people of collaboration has actually been a positive. We were always a remote team, so the remote aspect of it didn't impact us enough. Actually, one of the benefits we had is the larger companies and partners we're working with had a lot more time with COVID because they're all working from home, and their meeting schedules were down. So we were able to get to a lot of senior executives and get in front of a lot more people because people were working from home. Then we had to schedule a meeting, fly down to them, go see them. All of that, went away. You could just do a Zoom call, and they would do it in the car, or they do it 6 in the evening if they had to. And people got a lot more flexible, and that helped us get in front of a lot more people.
Thanks, Sanjay. So Julie, intentionally, I put you last because you're a different breed than the other folks here on the panel, because you're not focused on cybersecurity. You're really focused on physical security and physical safety. So talk about the changes that have occurred in your business. I've heard there's a few.
There's always something changing. Isn't that the case?
Yeah.
I think there's really 2 pieces of it. When we took a step back in March, just like everyone else was saying, the first piece was, how do we look at ourselves as a company? How do we look at our business? How do we look at how we're communicating, these kinds of things? And then the second piece was, how do we reassess the value that we bring to the market and make sure that it's strategically aligned with our customers' greatest priorities? So the first bucket was really, Paul started with it right out of the gate. How do we make sure we're taking care of our team? When we go to communicate with customers, are we offering them help, or are we coming off as ambulance chasing, right? We have to be very careful that we're striking the right balance in our communications. How do we communicate with the market that we are a viable business, we are an ongoing concern, and we're not going anywhere in a time of crisis? So that was really bucket number 1. The second bucket, which you alluded to, is that reassessment of our company's value and how do we approach the market. Because our crowd intelligence understands where people are in large venues, university campuses, corporate campuses, we realized right away that we had an opportunity to help with the safe reopening. How that safe reopening was going to look was definitely a big question mark. And I think for many places, it's still a question mark, right? So there's the first level response, which is how do we get everyone to wear masks and wash their hands and keep nice distances from one another. But eventually, we want to think about the larger venues, the larger spaces. And in our case, that might be 30,000 people in a sporting venue or 100,000 people in a university campus. So we went to the drawing board of our product roadmap and we said, what can we pull forward that's of critical importance to our customers? And it was things like density alerting when people are too close together or there's too many people in the same area. It was things like compliance, which no one likes talking about, but is really critically important. So it's not just putting good practices into place, but our data can show our customers what % of the time their environment is in compliance with their rules. 95% of the time, you never had more than 15 people in one area. Alerting, how do we make it actionable? And how do we make it actionable ahead of a bad incident so that we're not responding, going into a crowded area and saying, you, and you need to leave. We're getting ahead of that problem and saying, let's preemptively staff accordingly to our environment and the trends in our environment, so we're preventing that from happening in the first place. So it really has been an interesting acceleration of our roadmap. And we're just very fortunate that the building blocks we've been putting into place enabled us to move in that direction so quickly during this time period.
I think it's fair to say there are a few customers that you've landed in the last couple of months, couple of quarters, however you want to measure it, that would not have signed a PO in 2020 if not for the change in environment and value prop, right?
I like to think they would have, but it is possible that several of them were highly motivated to get fans, students, staff back in the building quickly. And that's really a huge impact to top line revenue in many of our customer environments. That is a very big motivating factor, but they're not going to do it if they can't guarantee safety, because they're balancing that with the risk to their brand, their liability, communicating to fans, to parents, to others. And that's really important to them as well.
Rick, you asked a question about changes in threat landscape too, which, I talked just very operationally, but it is very true that we saw a spike in behaviors after about 30 days or so that were business good for us, but they were absolutely changes. We saw a massive shift in brand attacks, fake domains, fake mobile apps. We saw a massive jump in impersonated social media accounts. And then the phishing leading to a lot of egress of PII within organizations that's been marketed in the dark web. So this is absolutely a spike that was a change based on circumstance that was a little bit tamer before the big COVID outbreak that, from a business perspective, you benefit from. It's gross to see, but it was absolutely the case.
Right. And I'd love to dig more on that with each of you. What have been some of the biggest changes from an adversarial point of view? I think we've all read the stats around phishing attacks up by a significant amount since COVID began, and using COVID almost as the Trojan horse, so to speak, to carry out some of those attacks. Around Amazon Prime Day, there were some big, highly publicized cloning related phishing attacks. But I'd love to hear from each of you as the experts. What are some of the trickiest or most interesting exploits that you've seen pop up in the last, in 2020 so far? Josh, maybe you kick it off. It's your
Sure.
world in particular.
Yeah, we've really seen attackers, particularly when it comes to this brand spoofing, phishing sort of attack vector, get very sophisticated. And I think that the change and increase in sophistication is driven by better education of both consumers and the workforce out there around these kind of scams and what they look like. Folks know today that when the URL doesn't look anything like what it should, that you probably shouldn't click it. Folks know that when the website doesn't look anything like the brand website that you're used to, you probably shouldn't put your data into it. And so what attackers have started to do is really make things look incredibly realistic. They'll create new domains that look so similar because by using different character sets, for example, to your own, that the human eye is not going to notice the difference, but they notice the difference. Or they'll hide the crazy domains that they're using behind some series of redirects and using things like bit.ly and other URL shorteners to kind of give you a familiar link. They'll make perfect copies of the websites that they're cloning. So perfect, in fact, that they're constantly updating, that they're just as dynamic as the real websites. They look and act just like the real sites. And in often cases, the attackers are working like a proxy, where whatever you do on the attack page gets proxied over to the real page. So when you type in your data, the attacker gets it, but you also get logged into the legitimate website, which really gives you no indication that anything has gone wrong. So the attackers have really stepped up and taken some pages out of the book of reality that the world has gotten better at detecting these attacks and that they have to be highly realistic. But you also see the tools that are out there that make it very easy for somebody to make a perfect clone of a website, to do the URL shortening thing. None of the techniques that we're seeing being used are are tremendously innovative in and of themselves. It's the combination of these all things put together that make for a really innovative and unique and extremely hard for a person to detect kind of attack, especially before you've had your coffee in the morning.
Hey, Paul, how about you? What's your perspective on this one?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, I talked to a CIO a couple days ago, and he said, we were talking about the third-party risk thing, and we were talking about the phishing. And he said, he said, you would think in today's environment, we'd have this figured out. But he said, we just made a major transfer to someone who we thought was the finance person for one of our third parties, a payment, right? He said, it was so legitimate. It was so well done, Josh's point, but this person had spoofed that they were part of this organization, this partner that was part of this, was an important partner of this company, and they transferred a lot of money. So you would think that wouldn't be happening now. You hear about grandma maybe getting ripped off, but very, very smart companies are getting ripped off in that way. The other example is we were talking to a large, big brand name bank, and I hadn't really thought about it this way, but they were looking for our help with, third parties. Again, that's the focus of what we do, but they were talking about remote workers. And so, okay, we talked about their remote workers, and most companies have figured out how to do the VPNs and do identity and access properly and so on. They get a lot of stuff in place to do that. Not all of them did, but a lot of them do. Well, they could put it in place because it's their employees. They know who they are. Maybe they have their computers as well. But this bank said, well, our call center is in Manila. And they said, in Manila, there's about 1 million people that work in call centers. And by the way, about 900,000 were sent home, vis-a-vis COVID, right? Just like every place else. The problem in Manila is these are not really exactly the highest paid workers. They're in secure call centers. And now they're going to go home. And maybe home is not quite the same environment that a lot of you have. And who knows what the security is. So we realize that because we track all the IPs on planet Earth, all the domains, all the stuff we track for, so some of the things Josh talked about, the spoof domains. And so we do all that stuff, and we do it by looking at these companies that support bigger companies. We realized that we could actually, with a couple of techniques, we could actually identify the IPs in those homes of the third parties and figure out, not by identifying the people, by the way, identify which ones were in a compromised situation where the local, the local computer, right? Maybe not even the user's computer, maybe the spouse or the relative or whoever else is living there, their computer is compromised and they're on the same network and they're blacklisted, or they have some sort of, it's compromised IP, and they're being used, in a botnet or something like that. So we could help them figure that out. And those are some of the things that we ran into. These are actual examples that came to us as part of this. That's so when you take what you read about and you listen to your customers, you start to understand how they see it.
Thanks, Paul. So Julie, in your world, it seems pretty obvious what the new threat vectors are and what your customers and prospects would be worried about. But is there any more detail you'd like to go into?
Yeah, and I think, we've been talking a long time about the parallels between cybersecurity and physical security and the eventual convergence between those two. I think for many folks, it was a question of when and how those converged. And in some organizations, they were much more closely linked than others. I will say there's a general awareness, now, as before for many folks, that cyber threats can have real world physical impacts. And I think the fact that it's such a distributed potential attack surface is something that we're still hearing from our customers, whether they are in, a campus or a venue where some folks are working remotely or people are coming back in person. I think it's very helpful from our perspective that we are seeing the CISOs of major organizations and the CSOs both tightly coordinated on any planning and any response. And that's partly because these plans are so dynamic and iterative, right? So everyone's putting their initial plan into place. And then as they see threats, whether physical or digital, evolve, they're coming back together very quickly, and they're refining their strategy. So to us, it's probably an acceleration of something we were seeing anyway, that I think will continue as folks do start to come back to the workplace in some hybrid fashion over time.
So Sanjay, I don't want to forget about you, but I do want to pause for a second and encourage folks in the audience to please submit questions if there's something that is on your mind or you'd like to discuss with the panel. We're at about the halfway point right now, and would love to open it up as soon as possible if there are questions out there. The next question I'd like to ask, as those questions hopefully come in, is around how your customers are behaving differently now than they might have at this point in time if there had been no COVID, no working from home, no closing venues and office buildings. So Sanjay, I'll let you kick off really that topic. How has really your customers' mindset changed, and what are they doing differently now?
So it's actually interesting. I think my answer is going to answer the previous question and current question. One of the things we're seeing is that threat actors are actually taking advantage of this time to set up future attacks. And one of the places that we're seeing is that user access behavior or any machine learning that companies have deployed, which are based on trained sets, right, of a user behavior set on a behavior of a user over the last year, 2 years, and then they say, oh, this behavior is not like normal, so there's something wrong. Well, users are not actually behaving the same anymore, right? Users are working at all different hours of day and night, and which is really throwing off the machine learning and the UAB settings that companies have set up. All of a sudden, lights are going off, saying there's something wrong, or transactions and actions are being stopped because the machine learning or the product thinks there's something not right here. And so when we look at our customers' data, we see that, and we also see usually the same threat actor, the same base, trying to do different things inside companies. And the assumption here is, we don't know this for a fact, but the assumption here is they are playing with the machine learnings and the user access behaviors of this company, and purposely adding corruption to this data so they can come back later on and look like a normal user. The users are having a hard time detecting, is this a normal user doing a normal thing, or is it a compromised credential doing a compromised thing? Because users are not working 9 to 5 anymore. And so the security analysts and the security teams have to now look at their data sets very differently. You can't retrain your data based on COVID, because if you do that, when COVID ends, it's going to again throw off your UAB and your machine learning. So I think it's a little different, interesting thing. We have to see how this plays out. We're working with our customers to understand the data sets better, and hopefully we can identify the difference between real versus bad, regardless of what the tool tells them. But this is something interesting. I had never thought of this angle until I started looking at customers' data, but obviously the threat actors have spent some time on this, and they are taking advantage of this opportunity.
Paul, how are your customers kind of handling current situation, and is maybe along the same lines, is there something they're not doing that you'd recommend they do?
Well, it's so there's a couple things, I guess, a couple ways to answer that question. One is, and you've seen this now, part of what's happening is when you listen to everybody on this panel, is we're in the business of bringing new technology to market, and the budgets haven't really changed that much, right? So if a company's going to spend a certain percentage on cybersecurity, then all of a sudden going to double that budget. So it's got to come from someplace, because few of us have been around this business for 20 years, and I don't think the budgets have changed a whole lot. In fact, if anything, they're trying to figure out how to get more bang for the buck from the security budget. So when you see stuff like, you see that, and I don't know, Julie may have a different take on this, because she's now bridging into the physical security budget, which that's a whole different budget, which is probably a good thing. But in our world, if you think of the ecosystem of a company's IT infrastructure and their partners and vendors and so on, it used to be they had everything sort of in your own IT system and you can control that. And now your IT system is connected to everybody that's in your ecosystem that's delivering your products, services. supply chain had a lot to do with bringing attention to this, right? So we couldn't get this product, we couldn't get that product. So all of a sudden people looked at the supply chain. And of course, the hackers are looking at the supply chain too. So they're not just trying to get into the financial system, but they're trying to disrupt the supply chain. So the attention, the lack of getting product brought a lot of attention to supply chain, which has actually helped our business. Big brand name companies that you'd be shocked don't have any cyber monitoring of their supply chain. And now they're all moving in that direction. So it helped us in that way. But when you get back to the practical budget side of things, what we learned was that as people, whether they had budget or they didn't have budget, they were not in as close communication with their financial organization, who was trying to control the throttle on spending based on the top line revenues. And we would bring a deal forward and they might say, well, you know, we have to go to the finance operation now. And of course, they're not working in the same. They can't walk down the hall and talk to finance. So that whole thing was stretched out quite a bit. So the process, they were struggling, the customers were struggling with the process to get something budgeted. Once it is budgeted, now they got to get it approved. Oh, now they got to get a contract signed. Oh, where are the lawyers? Well, they're working from home too. So all the things that would accelerate a deal and getting to a decision were protracted. And so I think that, you know, we learned, just as we learned, well, you heard at the beginning of this conversation, how do we interact with customers if they're remote? We don't want to ambulance chase. How they're working at home now. Will they give us their cell phone numbers? Then you get all the way to the other end of it where as you move forward and you start to progress, then how do you get a deal done? And that's changed too. And they're learning while we're learning. And that's, and it's, I like a lot of things about remote, but the ability for us as humans to multitask and get a lot of things done really has been impacted. But we're figuring it out because we're very adaptive people and we're getting better at it. They actually saw that the customers are getting better at it and we're getting better at it. And so I think in the next few months, we're all going to be, we'll be expert at it, and then we're not going to want to go back to an office.
I don't know about that, but anyway, Julie.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here on budget.
Yeah.
So it's true, you know, Paul, that I think these budgets are sometimes very fixed, and security, both, you know, digital and cyber, sometimes, sorry, digital and physical, can look like a cost center until that bad thing happens. And then everyone says, well, why didn't you spend money on buying this solution that you knew about and told us you wanted? So, you know, that's kind of the unfortunate reality of the industry sometimes. I would argue right now that COVID is shifting some of these budgets, and it's really a question of preparedness, right? So after some of these major school shooting incidents or after 9/11, the preparedness conversation was key, because you could no longer say, I could never imagine this happening in my environment, in my airport, in my school. It's a very unfortunate parallel to draw, but I think a lot of folks for decades have been warning about the dangers of a pandemic and all the things that we should be thinking about as we work in a world that has a pandemic going on. And I think the preparedness narrative has to change too, right? So when we're out talking to customers, we are taking a bit of a long-term perspective. We can help you right now with reopening. We can help you if things go back to normal, but we're also going to get you in a much better posture to be prepared for that next incident, which I hope is, you know, not for another 50 years or hopefully never again in my lifetime. But the reality is there is no excuse the next time this hits. And I think that's what's freeing up some budgets in the conversations we're having.
Well, that's great. Anybody else on this topic? Otherwise, I want to jump to traction as a startup. You okay
Just
with
a
that?
couple,
Oh, go ahead, Josh.
words, Rick. You know, I
Okay.
think that what I've seen change is our customers have realized that every interaction they're going to have to acquire a new customer, to retain a customer, to continue to satisfy a customer for probably 2, maybe 3 years is going to be digital. And I think as organizations are realizing that they've got this very long-term, pretty much digital-only interaction, the way that marketing works is changing. The way that advertising and general spend on customer acquisition and retention is changing. And it's becoming much more focused on the digital experience, which is driving a lot of different behavior in an organization about, oh my God, the digital experience. Now there's people who are looking at it that weren't looking at it before, maybe because their physical in-store experience isn't relevant and won't be for a little while. But those increased eyeballs, that increased focus, I think on this digital world and a digital go-to-market is really a difference, and it really changed the behavior of our customers.
You guys remember back in the early 2000s when BlackBerry was kind of kicking and people started working from home a little bit, and there's a study we've done. It said the average American is now working 13 months a year because it's become a part of their day, their night, their everything. You kind of get the sense that this COVID shift in the amount of video conference calls we're doing from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. because we're covering the whole world is kind of doing that same thing again to us. So the work day is becoming the work whole day. But you're also seeing a lot of productivity come out of that may be beneficial to the market as long as people can physically absorb it.
All right, unless there's anything else on that topic, I'd love to really talk about the startup environment. Clearly, from the level of VC funding that's gone into security, it's a hot market. Is that heat also on the customer side of things? Do you feel that, because you all have been in this industry for many, many years, is the customer appetite to deal with startups and buy from startups what it has been previously? Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better? Or how are you feeling about, that mindset relative to a startup company providing either cyber or physical security technology and products?
Might jump in. I think we all kind of accept the fact that our buyers are probably leaning towards the early adopter side of things. As Paul said, we're bringing new technologies to market. And as long as we stay really honest with ourselves and very, very focused on the verticals and the buyers or the buyer types and the personas that we are appropriate for at this stage in our life, I think we found a very willing appetite to continue to invest. If you get to the side of that, because it sounds like a good idea at the time, you spend a lot of cycles and they don't have the budget, they're not willing to step outside their comfort zone, and it's a complete waste of your time. I think now more than ever, focus is key. You can't go run a wild one just because you hope. We are earlier stage software companies, and not everybody's suited to just go spend money there, in fairness.
Who wants to go next?
I'll jump in. I tend to, this might sound too simplistic, but in Q2, some people were in denial and others were just in shock and didn't know what to do and scrambling to figure out how we're going to operate. In Q3, what I just explained before, this budget phenomenon where, okay, I think I have budget, but I don't know yet. And they have to go check, and that all went on. I finally see people starting to kind of lean forward and look forward, and whether they're remote or wherever they are, they're like, hey, we're doing this now. So I think we've got through that, and people are really looking forward, and that really sets the stage for new technology. And I think with the shock treatment that everyone's had around whatever it is, it does stop them to make them think about their business and where they're going. Their management's had time to think about that. Some industries have been hit by this very hard. Some have been given a boost. So that's all kind of becoming obvious. And to Pat's point, if you can align what you're trying to do with the markets that are moving forward and all that, you're fine. And we had some business in retail, and I thought, okay, that's dead. And one customer had to cut the budget. Another customer renewed the whole budget. And I'm reading in the news that they're Chapter 11, yet they're buying. And then the third customer is a big brand name. We all wear the jeans that they make. And while we're bringing a deal to the table, they announced that they're laying off 40% of the people. And so we figured out a way, and of course, they slashed the security budget, just top down slash, and the deal went sideways. But we worked with them to say, look, you've decided you want to work with us. We're going to help you get going with it now, and you can pay us later, right? So you have to really, it's very choppy waters, but I would say right now, I would characterize, it'd be really interesting what the others think, that people are leaning forward, people are looking forward, they're making their plans for 2021. And I think even though we're in the middle of this thing still, I think people can see a way out of this,
I think in some ways right now is a great time to be a startup, right? Crisis creates opportunity. The folks who are willing to work with early stage companies understand that we're nimble and that we can, be flexible in how we are thinking about the needs of the market, the needs of the customers. And generally, I think that's exciting to them. We've also seen customers who are taking this pause when there's not people coming into their office or venue or campus every day to really accelerate some of the tech projects they've been hoping to invest in over the last 5 years. We've seen a lot of massive cloud migrations. We've seen lots of systems and infrastructure upgrades. All those things are great for us because those are the systems we sit on top of and tie into. And it's really great to see that acceleration of the technical roadmap. So while I think there is definitely hesitancy, if you don't project the strength that you're going to be around, right, as a startup, and that is really important that we make sure to message that we are here for the long haul. If you can do that effectively, and if you have a novel solution for something that no one's ever seen before, there are more doors open to us than ever before to come in, have a conversation, and see where it goes.
So I just got a great question from one of our audience members. So I'm going to cut off others answering the last one and jump to this. So it covers the deployment of 5G and how will the rollout of 5G extend, in particular, the cybersecurity attack surface. So for the four of you who are most focused on cyber, who wants to go first?
I'll take a swipe at that one. I think 5G is a real significant change for the architecture of the internet and where the bandwidth is and where the bandwidth is going to come from. So there's a whole class of attacks that I think 5G could potentially make much more devastating and really different, specifically around denial of service attacks and other attacks that leverage large volumes of traffic and large volumes of compromised devices. These 5G devices are going to be powerful. Just to take advantage of the amount of bandwidth that's there, you're talking about walking around with the effective equivalent of the laptop that you had on your desk 2 years ago, now packaged into your mobile device. So you've got a lot of compute power there. And now you've got bandwidth going to those devices that's far more than we have coming to our homes. So you're talking about really a massive distribution of powerful devices with a lot of bandwidth. And that could very well open the door or really push the door much further open to the kind of DDoS activities we're seeing in the market right now. You've got a huge number of extortion campaigns that are driven by primarily, it seems like, state actors. Those state actors have the power to get their hands on big seas of 5G devices. I think you're going to see the volume amped up pretty significantly and companies really forced to pay some ransom or be brought to their knees by those kind of attacks. And it's going to take a really coordinated effort from the 5G providers, as well as the security companies and the potential victims to deal with this. That collaboration and coordination I haven't seen starting to happen yet.
So Sanjay, put yourself back in your old role working for a Fortune 500 company. What would you be worried about with 5G rolling out?
Really, really bad IoT devices being programmed by people trying to get stuff out to market as quickly as possible. I mean, I work for a retail store, which will run a lot of IoT devices in distribution centers and their stores. And manufacturers don't spend a lot of time on security when they do IoT devices, as we know, right? So you're going to have really, really bad IoT devices with ability to take a lot of data through it, right? In the old days, IoT devices were small and the data pipes were small, but with 5G, you have this massive data pipe now. So you're increasing your security footprint, you're increasing your footprint and lowering your security to some level. So I think that's going to be, going back to my old shoes, going to be a massive problem that just because when companies evaluate the IoT devices or 5G devices, do we really need this functionality, right? We tend to like the new shiny toys a lot, but do we really need this new shiny toy? Because this new shiny toy is going to bring a lot of problems into our environment. And how are we going to address it? And do we have the tool sets to address that? I think that would have been my fear in my old job, is how are we going to handle this new set of data. I mean, 5G is going to generate a lot of data as well. We're going to manage, store, parse through the data, identify the threats, and stop the threats, especially at the firmware level, which is where the problems most of the IoT devices will bring.
Anyone else on the cyber security side of the tracks have any more thoughts?
Yeah, I think we see it in supply chain, that there's been a lot of automation in supply chain, but they're not really looking at the cyber hygiene of the organizations. They look at the devices, and certainly 5G devices will open up new attack vectors in mass. But we see that for the first time, they're actually starting to look at the companies that are in the supply chains. So that's just another piece of the puzzle that we see related to 5G, and then also looking into what are the industries that will be adopting those technologies. Those are the folks adopting IoT stuff in mass as well. So,
Pat, anything from you?
I think everyone's basically said it. I think the cornerstone is that much more horsepower creates that much more opportunity for sure. And do we know what it is yet? No, but it's going to be huge. So.
So Julie, for you, I could imagine 5G actually being both a good thing and a bad thing. I think the cybersecurity folks took it from the angle that, hey, it's going to open up a much larger attack surface. But for you, it could actually be an enabler to help keep people safer. So tell me, how do you think about 5G in your world?
Sure. I mean, certainly the idea that lots of data can be transported very quickly is a boon in many ways for things that we're working on. The idea that there's tons of data that we're not even skimming the surface of right now that could be helpful in contextualizing our understanding of people and trends. And there are some major connectivity providers who are really thinking about who's going to fill those pipes once they're built. It's a recurring theme that we hear. They want to know, is Armored Things going to drive more adoption of things that are creating new and unique data that is very data intensive? We do try to balance that by using things that already exist in our customer environments. But when there are opportunities to lean into new and unique data sources, we're always embracing that. We just worked with a premier sporting event with high visibility, and we pulled in a new source of data. The more that they have, the more accurate we can be about predicting where people are, how they're moving. Our ability to keep people safe goes up, right? So to your point, there's a balancing act. We don't want people dropping sensors for the sake of sensors just to show that they can. We want to balance the risks that Sanjay and others laid out, that a lot of them do not have the right security built in at a firmware level or otherwise, with the fact that we're actually benefited by more and more data coming out of these environments.
Okay. So with about 5 minutes left, I see there's a number of questions that have come in. I'm going to ask one that might take us to the finish line because it's fairly open-ended, but feel free to take as much time as you want addressing it. But it's really around 2021 and what the future holds for your customers and the world at large, and what are things that some of the folks in the audience might do to reduce the risk to their organization that they may not have thought about. So if there's any insight that you could provide to help them think through, I know we've only got a couple of months to go before we're there, but to help prep for what could be yet another strange year.
I'll jump in, and obviously this is Terbium Labs, a bit self-serving, but it is a kind of an interesting space, and we just left that 5G, the explosion of potential for attack, which will likely be leveraged. And we're not a preventative technology at Terbium. We're there to help you understand when the inevitable has happened, right? And where it's showing up so that you can act and react as quickly as possible to stop the problem from persisting, whether it's compromised email accounts, it's missing PII, it's intellectual property that's been breached, it's patient information, whatever that might be. And if we're going to have an explosion in bandwidth capability and breach and everything else that's happened as a result of COVID and 5G, should we not start thinking about how we make sure that if the inevitable happens, that we can respond and react as quickly as possible to keep our customers, our employees, and our partners safe.
So this is probably not the sexy answer, but we spend a lot of time thinking about what our customers want, right? So we've covered that part of the roadmap already. But the other piece is the processes and controls that we're all putting into place. And I would say they're more important than ever to make sure that we understand our own risk as a business, that we're talking to our customers about their processes and controls, and that we're really auditing and validating our practices to make sure that we are not increasing our own exposure as a business, as a brand. So again, not the sexy answer, but I hope 2021 is full of great processes and controls.
I think one of the things we've learned during COVID is, learning and working with others. Take a restaurant for an example, and we go in, they have QR codes now, right? Not every restaurant had a QR code for their menu. Some did, and others learned from that in real time, right? And then they applied that, and so other customers can have QR code. Bring that mentality and that thought back to cybersecurity when you get back to work in next year and future. You will do the best you can for your environment, but somebody else might have figured something out that you have not figured out. Learn to collaborate with others and, do it in a safe and secure manner, obviously. But I mean, honest, again, it's a bit self-serving because that's what we do, but, learning from others and making yourself better is not a bad thing. COVID has told us that. Let's take what we've been doing for the last few months and apply it to your day-to-day cybersecurity hygiene.
Other thoughts?
I think I've seen over the years organizations say things to themselves like, "Who am I? I'm not big enough or important enough or well known enough to be the target of the cyber attackers. So I don't need to be super proactive. I can wait until something happens and then react to it." And I think that's just the wrong attitude and the wrong approach. And I've seen it time and time again now where organizations, smaller organizations, not the most well-known organizations, are the targets of these scams. And it's not the traditional thing of stealing your login name for your bank account so that your dollars can get pumped out. But it's often, "Hey, would you like a job? Fill out this form. Give us all your personal information. We're going to give you this great job at this small company that sounds like it makes a lot of sense. But after you've given up all that information, after you filled out the W-9 form so you can get paid, you realize that that's not the company you thought you were interacting with. It's not a real job and your identity's been stolen." And that really leaves a really bad mark on the organization whose brand was used to scam you. So I think that, solving these kind of problems, honestly, it's not that hard. It's just a matter of doing it and taking it seriously and going after it. And I think a lot of organizations are already sort of spending money on these problems in ways that aren't terribly effective, with call center employees that take the calls from customers who've been victimized, who are reporting that these scams happened, and then cleaning up after them, as opposed to sort of putting the problem first, solving the problem, and keeping the customers from ever having to make those calls.
Yeah, I just quickly throw my 2 cents in on 2021. I think situational awareness, there's a lot of, you got to understand your risk. You've got to understand where the threats are to your organization. And a lot of that is looking outside, right? Because you've moved to the cloud, you're adopting 5G, you put people at home. And so you've really expanded your attack surface. You really need to understand what that means in terms of risk, because that'll direct your spending. It's hard to do, but it's if I'm going to 2021, that's how I'm looking at it.
So I was hoping to end on that future-looking question and answer, but we did get one last-minute question, and I do like to keep the audience happy since they spent their time listening to us. So let's get this last question done maybe quickly in 2 minutes or less. So cybersecurity is a very competitive market. There are many competitors in various segments of the market, from products to services. How does a buyer figure out who to buy from?
Can I try that as an ex-buyer? Understand your risk, right? Get a good understanding of what is the risk to your environment. This way you prevent yourself from buying the new shiny toy. Understand your risk and then go after the largest risk. And the way you do it is understand your crown jewels. which is what if compromise will cause you the most damage, right? Reputation damage or financial damage, and learn to protect that and mitigate the risk around that, and then work yourself backwards. I think that's at least how I did it when I ran security operations.
Fully agree, Sanjay. I did an ebook years ago about what should boards and CEOs be thinking about, and it starts off with what are your biggest risk areas. Work from there. You can't solve every problem. Stay focused on those and chip away at and look at them because they'll change, but chip away at them, constantly be focused on the big ones, the biggest impact your business, brand, etc.
Any last thoughts on that topic?
Talk to someone you trust. If you're looking at new tech and you're looking at a startup, take a shot. But if you're going to try them. But if you're going to buy it, make sure that you've talked to someone who's actually had experience with it, and you'll be ahead of the game.
All right. Well, with that, I think we've hit the finish line, slightly over. But I'd like to thank Julie, Sanjay, Josh, Paul, and Pat for your time and insight. I'd like to thank everyone who was part of the audience, and particularly those who asked some great questions. And I look forward to doing another one of these in the near future. So thanks again.
for hosting. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.